Happy New Year's and welcome to another edition of the Trahern Crews show. Don't forget, this program will be restreamed on www.blacktvs.com or Black Watch Television on your Roku channel. Today, I got my man Jeremy English. His show also comes on Black Watch Television. It's called The Frank Knight Show. He talks about issues that are important to Black Americans. So tune in, check him out every Tuesday around 8 p.m. Um, so tonight we're going to analyze Joe Biden's speech he gave yesterday. As you know, 2024 is a presidential election year. So yesterday we got to see kind of like the two men basically fighting for their political lives and just their lives in general. So we seen President Joe Biden gave a speech at the church in South Carolina, and Trump also gave a speech yesterday. But we're going to focus today on Joe Biden's speech and a couple things that stuck out to reparationists like myself and many others across the country. How you doing? How you doing, Mr. English?
I'm doing pretty well, man. You know what I mean?
Happy New Year, brother. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. You especially, my brother. You know what I mean? Everything is good. What can I say? Just here for a good conversation and definitely to discuss, what went down at Mother Emanuel's church.
Mother Emanuel's church. There you go. Thank you for correcting us with that proper information. We are going to jump right into it. And we're going to go into about 2 or 3 minutes into this clip. Mr. Biden spent a lot of time yesterday talking about white supremacy and talking about January 6th. We're just coming off the anniversary of January 6th, where people, white supremacists, stormed the White House about the election results. And yeah, it was wild. And as for me, as a BLM protester, there's no comparison to the two. We get a bad rap, but you'll never see BLM protesters beating a cop to death. You'll never see us outside the Capitol with nooses or just any type of crazy stuff like that. That's not what we do. But politically, we're here to talk about the Black agenda and what's best for Black people. So we're going to jump into a clip right into about 2 or 3 minutes into Mr. Biden's speech, and then we'll come back and discuss it right here. So this was yesterday at the church in South Carolina.
By not just gunpowder, but by a poison that's for too long haunted this nation. What is that poison? White supremacy. Oh, it is. It's a poison. Throughout our history, it's ripped this nation apart. It has no place in America. Not today, tomorrow, or ever. From that day, this nation saw this congregation, this community, demonstrate one of the greatest acts of strength I have ever seen. I mean it sincerely from the bottom of the act of forgiveness.
Okay. So we just heard Joe Biden in a Black church talking about forgiveness and or the act of forgiveness. And he also talked about white supremacy. What are your thoughts on that, Mr. English?
Well, first I want to say that considering, and I'll make it quick, considering that you got a heavy competitive presidential campaign going on, and considering everything that's going on in regards to some of the stuff down at the border, it's kind of ironic that Joe Biden would pick Mother Emanuel's church to go ahead and start talking about white supremacy. That's number one. But more importantly, I think I want to kind of, go into a little taste of what the definition of benign neglect looks like. And for too long, we have been, as Black Americans, the foundation of the Democratic Party. And Joe Biden knows this. So for him to go down to Mother Emanuel's church and start talking about relative knowledgeable history based off of criminal acts that have been committed against Black Americans, it's ironic for him to use the term white supremacy now. I don't think Joe Biden in his career, and we can go back decades, 40 years worth of political stature. And I think maybe these past, roughly 6 years, maybe, Trey, it started to come in the lexicon, the term white supremacy. And I think, the grassroots really had a lot to do with that. Definitely.
I remember at times there was even Black people that would tell me like, hey, don't say white supremacy. Now they got shirts and stuff that say it, so that's good. We moved the conversation. The grassroots was able to move that phrase into the mainstream. But like you're saying, it's okay to talk about white supremacy. And if it's been a part of the fabric of American history, and if it's harmed Black people, what are you going to do about it? And going back to those executive orders, since you know about white supremacy on his first day in office, and this isn't, saying I'm against Joe Biden or anything like that, because we have a long time to decide who we're going to vote for. And each side has a chance to present what they're going to do for the Black community. And that's what these speeches and presentations are about. So, but when Joe Biden first came into office, he signed, like I think you were talking about executive order. He signed on the first day, he signed over like 90 executive orders, or, it was that's the first thing he did was signing executive orders. But how did those executive orders help Black Americans? And I want a question for us to be asking as we're talking in a Black church.
And I want to clearly bring up a strong point here too. He initially talked about white supremacy, OG, but he failed to talk about, for example, some of the things that he promised on his campaign trail, which were that LIFT Act that him and Sister Kamala Harris were going around, the country talking about, and that police commission, that National Police Commission, that Police Accountability Commission. Joe Biden, he promised those two things to Black people on his campaign trail. And let's just say, for example, he didn't start out his conversation in that church talking about police accountability, considering he's sitting in a church where Black people were murdered by a young white male who based off the criminal complaint was clearly some type of was part of some type of I would say alleged.
Can you explain what happened at the church?
Well, from what I know, and going back to that that tragic day, and I'm just going off of again, I don't have the the report in front of my face or anything, but basically you had a young white male who was an armed young white male go enter that church freely and murdered 9 Black folks.
But he prayed with them first, right?
If I'm correct, he sat in that he sat amongst the parishioners for a little while before he started his massacre.
Prayed with them, massacred them. Then when he was arrested, the police took him to Burger King.
They took him to a restaurant.
They didn't shoot him. They didn't pepper spray him. They didn't. what we see happen to unarmed black men in many instances, he was taken to Burger King after he had just killed 9 black people in a church. But so this is the group. So this is who Joe Biden's talking to yesterday. This is
And
the congregation that he's talking to that experienced this type of trauma. Go ahead.
well, I think that's a perfect picture. That's 100% perfect picture to give black people when it comes down to him speaking at that particular pulpit. Because again, you're coming into a situation where it was a clear black hate crime that went on. We don't have to go back in history and take a look at the others. We've had churches that were bombed.
That's right.
We understand completely where you're going. And now, once you use the narrative, white supremacy, there's something to be said for following that narrative with solutionary communication of folks. And I didn't hear any solutionary communication, but we can move on.
But he said, just to follow back up, he did say that he did an executive order on policing, to be fair. But I think, again, if you fact check that, I think that was for federal police. So like that would be, and most people rarely are coming in contact with federal police. I mean, not on a day-to-day basis, I don't think.
But again, just even having that accountability commission, at a federal level, that would have been a huge win when it comes down to, for example, us looking at our protections, on a federal level starting,
Or he met with George Floyd's family. So the George Floyd Policing Act, the Breonna Taylor Act, qualified immunity. There's a lot of legislation around policing and police reform that the Democrat Party, keep in mind, and this isn't to hammer on Joe Biden and the Democrats, but this is just to say, hey, right now, black people have some serious wants, and we're serious about our vote, right? We know that we make or break elections, but we cannot, as a group of people, continue to afford to continue to vote for candidates who are not going to deliver the goods and resources and the policies that we as Black Americans want. I'm going to go to the next clip real quick, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on this next clip. Again, you're watching the Trahern Crews show. This show will be rebroadcasted on www.blacktvs.com or Black Watch Television on your Roku channel. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Look, folks, I understand their passion, and I've been quietly working with the Israeli government to get them to reduce and significantly get out of Gaza. I'm using all that I can to do that. But I understand the passion. Look, folks, after the civil... Thank you. Well, thank you. After the Civil War, defeated Confederates couldn't accept the verdict of the war. They had lost. So they say they embraced what's known as the lost cause, a self-serving lie that the Civil War is not about slavery, but about states' rights. They've called that the noble cause. That was a lie. A lie that had not just a lie, but had terrible consequences. It brought on Jim Crow. So let me be clear, for those who don't seem to know, slavery was the cause of the Civil War. There's no negotiation about that.
Mr. English, you want to chime in on that right there?
Yeah, I can chime in a little taste about that. I kind of want to start out with, and I kind of want to be clear about this and how, I approach things, because I don't want people to look at me as if, I'm on here, to talk about, Joe Biden, and I'm not saying anything about Donald Trump. The subject is, Joe Biden, and what he was talking about at Mother Emanuel's. I've got a lot to say about Donald Trump.
That's right.
A lot, but again, two birds of a feather always flock together, and I'll leave it at that. So Joe Biden was correct in what he was saying. The issue that I have with Joe Biden is you were very correct on your history, sir. But when it came down to, for example, those buses that Hunter and them had to get on in elementary school, you weren't too all for black folks riding on them buses. That's number one. More importantly, number two, you can revise and go through everything that those lineage-based folks had suffered. You are very correct. Yes, you are very correct. The Civil War was about slavery. It was about ending it. So, and you had black people fighting to end it. Soldiers, So yes, you can totally talk history, and you can even get close to saying how important we are to history. But the key piece is what are you going to do about it? What are you truly going to do legislatively? I would have to say at this point, executively, because getting anything through the Senate and the House right now, based off of a reparations agenda, it's going to be a tough fight. But as the president of the United States, there are some things you can do on executive order that can really target that lineage base immediately. So, yes, he clearly knows and has a conversation. That's the key piece. Joe Biden does have a conversation about slavery, and it's a good conversation. I would have to say that. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it, honestly?
Indeed. And then, I mean, if you're saying, that the war was about slavery, and slavery was a crime, like you're saying, what are you going to do about slavery? And the demand right now is reparations. But not only that, he said that the great lie that the Confederates were telling caused harm, and then he was comparing that lie to the lie of today with Trump lying about the election. But what the lie from the Civil War caused, he said that caused Jim Crow, right? So there's people who were alive in Jim Crow who are still alive today, who suffered in the Jim Crow era, and they deserve reparations. And what we're saying is, Joe Biden, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about Jim Crow reparations? What are you going to do about reparations for slavery, since you know all these great history? And like you said, that great lie that Trump is telling has consequences, but also the great lie from the end of the Civil War had consequences that lead all the way up to today. So like you said, Jim Crow, but also redlining and redistricting, and also mass incarceration, which came from the 1994 crime bill.
And I didn't even have to talk about that.
But I'm just saying, but just when we talk about the Great Lie, that's what the Great Lie caused. And we're still suffering from the Great Lie today. So to start that repair process, we need President Biden to acknowledge that. And then once you acknowledge, you can start dealing with redress. And
we'll see. Here's the key piece to that, Trey. He went to a mother's again. I have to go back to the church that he went to, because Joe Biden is not one of those folks who does not remember history. Right. He knows that, you know what I mean, you know, that he instituted that 94 crime bill. He was the author of it.
That's right.
I mean, that has, you know, which has become, like you said, right now at this point, I mean, our prison industrial system, my brother, is a plantation for Black people at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he knows this information, and with him knowing it, my thing is I'm done with you going to our churches and just explaining what we know. I need to hear solutionary talk. And if you're not pushing solutionary talk, then you're just completely, for example, you're completely
acknowledging that the Democratic Party itself
acknowledging that the Democratic Party itself has a benign neglect policy. All of our grievances, you will allow us to express our emotions, but you will not come up and you will not talk about any solution.
And we'll move on. But what precipitated that part was there were some protesters in there protesting about Palestine. I don't know if that, you know, was the right venue for that or not, but that's what they were there for. And then he went on to explain, but again, when you talk about benign neglect, there's money going to the war in Palestine, there's money going to the war in Ukraine, and we're saying as reparationists that money could be going to Black Americans whose ancestors descend from U.S. chattel slavery to get the reparations process going. That money could be going to fight homelessness, where 50% of the homeless population is Black, right? So these are some of the things that we're talking about. Yeah, that protest is what prompted him to start talking about the Great Lie, but the way resources are being spent on wars abroad, think about even Afghanistan, right? The war in Iraq, right? And then these wars today, the trillions and the billions of dollars that are going to genocide. There's war in the Congo, right? 6.9 million people have been displaced. So if we can take some of that money that we're using for war abroad and spend it right here at home, we could end what we're coming up on Martin Luther King Day. He wanted a war on poverty, right? And we think that we're going to hear a lot of people invoking MLK over this weekend. We're going to hear across Republicans and Democrats are going to talk about MLK, but what are you doing about the war on poverty? And the speeches where MLK talked about reparation and him talking about when we go to Washington, we're coming to get our check. But yeah, so that I just wanted to throw that in because that's what precipitated that part of that discussion. Did you want to add on to that?
You broke that down. We can move on to the next one, my brother. You broke that down 100%.
Okay, so man, I know here in Minnesota, we had Juneteenth and we was able to talk to our sister. Matter of fact, I'm gonna just let it continue to play from right here.
Now we're living in an era of a second lost cause. Once again, there's some in this country trying to turn the loss into a lie which, if allowed to live, will once again bring terrible damage to this country. This time, the lie is about the 2020 election. The election which you made, your voices heard, and your power known. Just 2 days ago, we marked the third anniversary of one of the darkest days in American history, January the 6th, the day in which insurrectionists stormed the United States Capitol, trying for the first time in American history to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the country. We all saw with our own eyes the truth of what happened. That violent mob was whipped up by lies from a defeated former president, smashing windows, smearing blood on statues, ransacking offices. Outside, insurrectionists erected gallows, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Inside, they hunted for Nancy Pelosi, chanting, "Where's Nancy?" We saw something on January 6th we'd never seen before, even during the Civil War. Insurrectionists waving Confederate flags inside the halls of Congress built by enslaved Americans. A mob.
Let me say something about that real quick, man. You know, there's something to be said for this dude to be presenting himself in a church where Black people were murdered based off of white supremacist hate. White supremacy hate. And there's something to be said on how he didn't say any of those people's names. He didn't acknowledge none of them folks. Not in the way that you're supposed to, you know.
Not how he's acknowledging Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence.
And there's something else to be said on how you could have, and let's be clear about this, and this is where I'm going with it. Trey, you don't have to go here with it. I have to. There's something else to be said, and there should be a conversation about how monolithically we have been the moral compass of this country since its inception, since we built it. And people have latched on to our culture, our story, and how we have overcome in a situation where we're placed in a system of hate. And for those Palestinian folks to raise up that agenda at that time in that church, understanding that you have Black folks in there who suffered through a hate crime. Hate that's been ongoing in this country since its inception. But here we go with your agenda, not the Black folks in there, not the ones that suffered agenda, your agenda. And you're getting money for it. When can we, and this is the key piece, Black folks, this goes to you too. When can we accept and understand that we are being completely ignored? Even in a church where we are murdered, we are being completely ignored.
No, and I just think these are things that the progressive left has to really think about when you're doing direct actions. You know, just think some things out, you know, before you really do it. I know here last week in Minnesota, a group of Black people went up into a church because a brother was in the parking lot praying and the white pastor called the police on him, right? So some activists showed up at the Sunday service to ask the pastor, like, yo, why did you call? You know what happens when you call the police on Black men? Why did you do that? So they came there and had a conversation during the service about that. Some pastors were mad here in Minnesota and reached out to some of the activists like, hey, why did you do that? But then our question was, well, have you reached out to that brother who was praying in the church, in the parking lot, and had the police called on him by that white pastor? Have you offered him a prayer? Have you sat down? Have you met with him? Or are you just calling to chastise some activists who came to a brother's aid who was praying? Right? So they might have seen, but that doesn't, but again, that's a different situation than that situation. So definitely, I think you need to make sure that you have aware Black people who are helping you plan your actions, especially when you're dealing with Black people or issues with Black people. But then going back to Joe Biden, he said that the Capitol and where they in the halls of Congress, not just the Capitol, but was also built by enslaved Africans or enslaved Americans, he said. And we know those enslaved Americans were Black slaves, or those were, yeah. So that's who he was talking about. But yet, we don't see any executive orders coming from this administration to address the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow.
Not to mention, let's call it what it is. We're hearing a lot about chattel slavery nowadays. Nikki Haley as well. That's another conversation, but she had to answer the question herself.
But he's talking about, actually, that's what he's talking about in this speech. He's talking to Nikki Haley here. He's talking to Trump. He's talking to the insurrectionists. So he's talking this language, but then he's not following it up.
Again, this sounds exactly like a remix record. When he was on his campaign, going after the presidency 4 years ago, this sounds like the same remix campaign. Joe Biden kept it real. He went to Charlemagne. He said, man, if you vote for Trump, you ain't Black.
Right.
That's how much confidence he had with Black folks at that time.
Right.
That's how much. Excuse me.
But it's a little different this time.
It's a little different, but let's call it what it is. Right now, across this country, we both know there are dozens after dozens of reparations initiatives that have passed. And they've passed in Republican states, Democratic states. They've passed nationwide. You had the biggest one, basically California, the biggest state, in the union. They had a reparations commission.
Illinois has a Republican governor, and they just got a reparations commission, statewide reparations.
And for him to be at Mother Emanuel's and not even use the term reparations, Trey, it just reeks. It just reeks of we hear your issues and concerns. We understand your history, but we're not going to give you any solutions. We're not going to talk about. We're not even going to talk about the solutions you come up with, because on the grassroots level, reparations was brought upon by the grassroots, and it's just incumbent for him to say something at this point, man.
Yeah. So even that, and we're going to finish these other clips too. But I just wanted to bring up something, just the language, because the language is very important. So this came out December 30th, right before New Year's. Congressional Black Caucus looked to tackle police brutality, reparations in the new year. And he says, we're going to continue to fully, but then the article starts out saying, we're going to continue to focus on fully funding public schools, dealing with the issue of economic inequality. Then he said, uplifting the issue of reparations. U.S. Representative Jamal Bowman. So he said uplifting. right? He didn't say passing or getting it into law, just uplifting it, right? So just being careful. It's cool to uplift reparations and start talking about certain words, but we need tangibles. We don't just need words, we need action. So, and the reason why I brought that up is because President Biden said that this is the lowest Black unemployment in years, or he said something like that. But then Trump said that when he was in office, it was the lowest since slavery. So I don't know who's telling the truth. Then he said, Joe Biden said that the racial wealth gap has been cut in half. He said this yesterday at the church, that the racial wealth gap has been at its, under him, is lowest in 20 years.
Okay.
And so he said that, but I don't like fact checking it. I did do a little fact checking about it, and I don't think the racial wealth gap might have closed a little slightly, but not enough. Like, it's still so astronomical. It's not. We can't.
Okay, let me tackle a little bit of that before we move on real quick. Just a little bit of that, because you can talk about the racial wealth gap, but there's a lineage wealth gap,
right?
And that's a whole other conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because and when it comes down to it, we can't play any more games when it comes down to understanding what the agenda is at this point. Black people need reparations. It's not something that we're asking for at this point. This is an issue that we are pushing.
Demanding.
We're pushing this issue especially on the grassroots level. So you can't ignore your constituency, your foundational base, for too long.
Right.
When you said they talked about that, he talked about that uplifting talk. That's good conversation for us, but legislatively, we know that you are overdue in doing something for us.
Okay, we're going to take a quick look at this next clip.
Insisted on an open casket at his funeral because he said, "Let the world see what I saw." The truth matters. It always matters. We can't just learn what we want to know and not what we should know. We should know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are. That's what great nations do, and we're a great nation, the greatest of all nations. We're not perfect, but at our best, we learn from our past, and we look to the future.
You want to chime in on that?
Run that back one more time. Can you run that real quick? Run that right back.
With your help, we established a national monument in honor of Mamie and Emmett Till, because we heard Mrs. Till's call, mother of a 14-year-old son who was lynched and whose body was mutilated. But the mother insisted on an open casket at his funeral because she said, "Let the world see what I saw." The truth matters. It always matters. We can't just choose to learn what we want to know and not what we should know. We should know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are. That's what great nations do, and we're a great nation, the greatest of all nations. We're not perfect, but at our best, we learn from our past.
I got to let me touch that real quick, man, just real quick. And this goes back to when we talk about repair and understanding what repair looks like and why repair is so important and why it ties into reparations. You see, Joe Biden was able to completely talk and express what actually happened to Emmett Till, but he really didn't dive into what the United States federally did for Emmett Till. Now, they created that law, which is true, but they didn't even apply it to the people that were still alive at that time who committed the crime itself. I forgot her name. I want to say it begins. I want to say her name starts with Carolyn.
Oh yeah,
Caroline.
she just passed away not too long ago.
Yeah, she just not passed away too long ago. And let's be clear about this. The federal government, they never charged that woman with a crime, even though it's reported that they did. Have a warrant out for her arrest. As a matter of fact, I think the family had a copy of the warrant and they never enforced it. And there's something to be said about how you can create a bill on behalf of this brother's name, but the warrant that was on paperwork was never enforced for the crime.
And was there even a hate? But what about a hate crime bill? Followed up after that too. So that's what I'm saying. Like there was no legislation. I think he said they made a monument,
Yes,
but
but I
not no
don't.
legislation, a statue. See, that's what I'm saying. People make statues, but then there's no legislation to hold people who will lynch today accountable. There was no, like he said, the world seen what happened to Emmett Till, but the world also seen what happened to George Floyd. So there was no, after the murder of George Floyd, there was no legislation to make sure what happened to George Floyd never happened again. That was a modern day lynching. So there was no modern day, there was no anti-Black hate crime bill put forward, but we know other groups have gotten an anti-hate crime bill who haven't even been here as long as we have and who haven't experienced as much hate as we have. So the warrant, yes, but legislation to make sure that it never happens again to another Black person is what really needed to happen, what still needs to happen and has not happened. He talked about the racial wealth gap. We know, according to the New England Journal of Medicine, according to the Brookings Institute, according to the Federal Reserve, that reparations is the quickest and most efficient way to address the racial wealth gap. Yet, Joe Biden had the House, he had the Senate, and he had the executive office for 2 years, and he made no moves to pass a comprehensive reparations bill that he could have done. Like he signed all those executive orders on his first day in office. He could have signed an executive order for economic justice for Black Americans whose ancestors descend from U.S. chattel slavery. And he still can do that today. So that's why we're not saying this isn't to blast Joe Biden, but this is, or the Democrat Party, but this is to let you guys know what you need to do if you want the Black vote in 2024, or whoever wants the Black vote in 2024. But we have an agenda, and that at the top of that agenda is reparations. 75-80% of Black American voters support direct cash payments for reparations. It's the number one issue right now,
Let me say it
according
like
to the
this.
congressional Black Caucus. Go ahead.
Let me
Then we're
say it
going to
like
check
this
out
at
this
this
last
point, my
clip.
brother Trey. If you're not for direct cash payments for American descendants of chattel slavery, foundational Black Americans, then you ain't Black. I'm gonna do it.
That
I'm
part.
gonna go with Joe Biden's talk now. I got to go with Joe Biden's terms now because you got to understand it that way, Joe. Here we go.
Okay, so we're gonna take a listen to this last clip and get your thoughts on that.
We should know the good.
So you just heard him tell the Black church, the Black community, I owe you. We'll listen to it, put it all in context a little more.
Union. I'm here to speak to another truth. It's because of this congregation and the Black community of South Carolina, and not an exaggeration than Jim Clyburn, that I stand here today as your president, because of all of you. That's a fact. That's a fact. And I owe you.
Mr. English, you want to chime in on that? He just said, go ahead. You heard what he said.
The key piece to that is Black folks in 2020 decided that after what happened on January 6th, it was more important for us not to have somebody in the executive branch who showed so much emotion, was prepared and stable enough to run this country. And because we put you into office, like you said, Trey, with the House and the Senate, we expected that because we didn't achieve what we needed to achieve the previous 8 years from that other situation, that you were going to understand how important it was to refocus on the foundation of your base, your voters base, you know, and you knew that it was Black people, specifically in those battleground states, that went out of their way to vote for you. You knew it. So when you say I owe you, this is the key piece. You owe us because you know you haven't did anything. You know you haven't did anything, and you're admitting I owe you because you haven't did anything. And if you have to come in there and say I owe you 1 year away from when we are electing a new president, then you're in a tough situation. You're in a very tough situation right now. Now, I'm not saying that, for example, Black people are going to go out there and vote for Trump. Hell no, I ain't saying that crap. But what I'm saying to Mr. Joe Biden, you know, and you know, for example, the conversations about the Democratic Party, because that's what he represents. Like Trey said, at this point, the Black vote is up for sale. And because Joe Biden has admitted that he owes us and he has did nothing for us, then we're telling you now the stakes just went a little bit higher, because now that the president said, well, yeah, I owe them. I ain't did nothing for them in 3 years, but I owe them. Well, yeah, I guess the stakes went a little bit higher now, Joe, because you're admitting what you haven't did for us. And I hope Black people, man, who are on whatever train it is, the Republican or the Democratic train, I hope you guys are listening to this brother Trahern's podcast tonight. This is a great broadcast. Because what he's basically telling you is look, in all honesty, they know what the agenda is. They are telling it to us in our face, but honestly, they're saying they owe us. And if you're not going to respond to your communication to us, that means if you're just going to tell us that you owe us, but you're not going to do anything about it, then what should we do for you?
That's like I owe you, but I'm not going to give you the money that I owe you, though. I just want you to keep doing the work that you do for me for free. You know what I'm saying? I want you to just keep. But if somebody says I owe you, that means that there was some service or performance or something was done of value that the other party did to make the other party say, hey, I owe you. So what did Black people do for Joe Biden that prompted him in a Black church that 9 Black people died in to say something like that was murdered by white supremacists, right? What prompted him to say, I owe you? Well, he said, if it wasn't for you, if y'all didn't vote for me here, because before South Carolina, Bernie was winning, right? Bernie was winning all the elections. So, and then to come back, what you're saying, not even just in the primary, once Biden started hitting them southern states, he started, closing the deal pretty heavy. So when you get into like Alabama, you get into Mississippi, then against Trump too, those states, Biden's winning by big margins because of the black vote. Detroit matters. Philadelphia matters. Atlanta matters. You know what I'm saying? They flipped blue for the first time in 20 years. Where that state went blue, and that was because of the black vote. So yeah, he owes that congregation, but he owes the black vote whose ancestors descend from U.S. chattel slavery nationally. But the thing is for us to understand that as black voters, that hey, this guy just said he owes us. What do we want? 75% to 80% of us say we want direct cash payments for reparations. So this must be what when he comes to your city, when he comes to Detroit, when he comes to Philadelphia, when he comes to Jackson, Mississippi, when he comes to St. Paul, hey, what are you going to do about reparations? You owe us. And if he's not responding right, then he might not be the guy this year. You know what I'm saying? And that's at the state level too. You know, if people aren't ready to move at reparations at the local, state, and federal level, then we have to move in a different direction. We can't afford to vote for Black Americans whose ancestors descend from U.S. chattel slavery cannot afford to vote for candidates that do not support reparations. Period. We just can't. So that's the situation right now. Thank you for joining us tonight. We was going to go through the year in review for BLM, but we'll probably do that later on this week. This conversation went a little longer than I thought. This was just a quick nighttime education bill. We just want to build, and we're not saying anything's off the table for Biden and the Democrats or the Republicans or the independent Green Party, but we're just telling you, this is what we're on. Can you deliver the goods? Do you have the will to do it? Are you ready to do the right thing for black voters? And then you can get the vote. It's not just, oh, we're voting blue no matter who, or this guy went to the Dartmouth, I'm voting for. No. Do you support this? Right here, we have some things on this piece of paper, reparations at the top. Do you support that? If you support that, we can rock with you. Not just say it in words, and then you can, like, it's different with Joe Biden because he can do this tomorrow.
And I want to add into there, man.
So
legislation doesn't mean sitting at a table. Legislation doesn't mean having a conversation. Legislation means passing bills,
and it
getting
becomes
the bill on the books. Too many folks can sit up on, and I'm not talking about nobody's platform or nothing like that, but can sit up and talk about, oh yeah, we're having a conversation. Oh yeah, we're sitting at the table. I don't care what table you sit at. Last time I checked, kids sit at the kids' table or adults sit at the adults' table. But there's stuff business that needs to be done. That means people still need to stand on business, whatever table you're sitting at.
That part.
You know, I just wanted to make that clear, man, because again, I've seen reparations initiatives pass all over this country, and that can't be ignored.
That part. So thank you for joining us tonight. Looking forward to your show later this week. So we're gonna chop it up and tune in to that again. Thank you all for tuning in to another edition of the Trahern Crews show. The show will be rebroadcasted on www.blacktvs.com or Black Watch Television on your Roku channel. Have a prosperous week. All right. Peace.